Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stephen Kingcast, one man's musings on the works of Stephen King. Each week, I will review one entry in the bibliography of Stephen King in chronological order of publication. And this week, I am actually speaking to you both from the present and from the future. Let me explain. So if you're listening to this in the present, then you're getting this podcast when it drops for the first time as I continue my examination of the televised works of Stephen King that I never got around to during my first go-around of the podcast. But if you are listening to this in the future, you are listening to this where I have placed this episode closer to the chronology of the book that it is loosely based on, that being 1994's Nightmare and Dreamscapes. So just remember that every episode that drops now will be reordered to fit the streamlined approach to the podcast, so that everything does fall under that original mission statement, which is the chronological order of publication. Any adaptation of that publication will follow the review of the publication itself before I move on to the next published book or book of short stories. So whether you are listening to this now, well, now is subjective depending on when you're listening to it. So regardless of whether you're listening to this in 2026 when this first comes out, or if you're listening to it in 2046 in the future, thank you for listening to the Stephen Kingcast in all of its permutations. So today I'm going to be talking about Nightmares and Dreamscapes, like I said, the loosely based adaptation that contains short stories, some from Nightmares and Dreamscapes, the collection of short stories from the 90s. Some are not. Some are pulled from other short stories, but I can understand why they chose the Nightmares and Dreamscapes name. It's an awesome name. So thank you, everyone, for listening. Just let me kind of catch you all up on what's been going on with the Stephen Kingcast, what to expect with the Stephen Kingcast, and what to expect from Stephen Kingcast adjacent works. So as you may know, I have been exploring all of the televised works of Stephen King that I never got around to on the first go-around of the podcast, and that has been fun. That has been fun for me to be able to, engage with this stuff without the looming burden, I guess, or the daunting task of making my way through the entire chronological order of Stephen King's publication, as I had been when I first started out the podcast. So this has been fun. That takes us to today, Nightmares and Dreamscapes. And what I get to do, or what I want all of you to be aware of as well, is that you are still going to get weekly reviews on the Stephen Kingcast, with everything that you expect from the Stephen Kingcast of in-depth reviews and thoughts and making those connections and analysis that you've gotten from me for about 12 years. But I also want you to be aware that if you like this podcast and like what I have to say and have joined me on this ride so far, there are more episodes and more content for you over on Patreon. So if you head on over to patreon.com/Stephen Kingcast, you will find different options for you. You have the constant reader tier. If you subscribe to the constant reader tier, then you get early access to Stephen Kingcast episodes. So this is great for longtime listeners of the show who have caught up on everything and can't wait for that next episode. They're all right there for you. You get early access to upcoming episodes that will come out on the live feed. And for those of you who the ads drive you nuts, there are no ads over on the constant reader tier. Also, you get anytime there's Stephen King related news, I will talk about that Stephen King related news on the constant reader tier. So, for instance, there are at least 2 episodes up there regarding Stephen King related news. One is news, Stephen King related news, not nudes, as it kind of sounded like I just said. There is no tier for Stephen King related nudes. I think that you'll have to search elsewhere on the internet for that. But there are at least 2 episodes on the constant reader tier where I was able to discuss relevant Stephen King information. There is a 1 episode dedicated to the upcoming 3rd concluding chapter of the Talisman trilogy, Other Worlds Than These, not to be confused with the other tier of the Patreon feed, but the actual upcoming book. I discussed that at length, and then I discussed Mike Flanagan's upcoming adaptation of The Mist, and the pros and cons and the larger question of why. So that's an example. You have upcoming episodes, you have news-based stories, and then you have, and this is fun, for anyone that has liked my reviews of non-Stephen King related books, such as the Pine Deep trilogy by Jonathan Mayberry, or any of the Joe Hill reviews that I've done, 20th Century Ghosts and Horns, The Fireman, Lock and Key, Strange Weather, and King Sorrow. If you like those non-Stephen King reviews, but still like the in-depth quality of my book reviews, then if you head on over to the constant reader tier, you will have access to anytime I do a review of a non-Stephen King book. And what you have at your disposal right now is a review of Dean Koontz's Winter Moon. So I have been getting back into Dean Koontz, so expect more Dean Koontz content over on Constant Reader, which has been a lot of fun. So for any of you that were alive in the 80s and 90s for the big manufactured culture wars between Dean Koontz and Stephen King, then you get to revisit that over on the Constant Reader tier. And I have been pouring a lot of love and attention onto the other tier, which is Other Worlds Than These, not related, not to be confused with the upcoming chapter, concluding chapter of the Talisman trilogy. But what Other Worlds Than These is, it's like it says, it is, it allows me to be able to discuss the other genres and the other franchises and the other stories that exist out there in the multiverse, whether it's superhero content, whether it's other horror movies or television shows, comic books, what have you. Anything that tickles my fancy, that may tickle yours, it's over there. So some episodes that I have been able to do. I did a deep dive into the pop culture history of Batman and gave recommendations of Batman stories that you may not know, but I framed it around the context of the most recent iteration of Batman, Absolute Batman, and what that means for pop culture at large as we head into Batman's entry into public domain. I did a review of the Killer Monkey movie Primate, which was a lot of fun. I did a deep dive into Daredevil, both the comic book character and the Netflix iteration and the evolution from Netflix to the MCU. It allowed me actually to be able to look at the MCU at large. I talked about the Disney Plus shows. I then did a review of episode by episode of Daredevil Born Again Season 2. I was also able to head on over to Westeros. I gave a deep dive into George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire adaptation, Game of Thrones, and pop culture's relationship with Game of Thrones, and that allowed me to do a review of the episodes of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and I'm very excited that we get to look forward to the 3rd season of House of the Dragon reviews you'll be able to find over on Other Worlds Than These. Also, on that feed, you can get weekly reviews of the 2nd season of Apple TV's Monarch: A Legacy of Monsters, and on top of that, you get a deep dive of the history of Godzilla, and a review of Gareth Edwards' Godzilla from 2014, which kicked off the MonsterVerse. I did an exploration of King Kong, all heading into the second season of Monarch Legacy of Monsters. And most excitingly, at the time of this recording, I was so happy to discuss something very bad is going to happen on Netflix. So there's a near 2-hour episode review of that show, the strengths of that show, the thoughts on the evolution of that show as it goes on. It was a wonderful experience, and I was very, very happy to talk about it. So Other Worlds Than These is exactly as it sounds. It is a podcast that's dedicated to everything other than Stephen King. But so if you are a fan of the Stephen Kingcast, there are being put out into the internet ether anywhere from between 3 to 5 or 6 episodes a week across the main feed, the Stephen Kingcast, the Constant Reader tier, and Other Worlds Than These. So there's a lot of good stuff out there, and if you haven't checked out the Patreon page, then just head on over to patreon.com and check out Stephen Kingcast. And just check it out. That's all that I ask. Also, if you haven't already, write into the Stephen Kingcast. Write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com and give me all of your thoughts on anything related to Stephen King and anything that relates to either the Constant Reader or the Other Worlds Than These feeds as well, because I always love hearing from you. You can also subscribe, follow me on TikTok, on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Blue Sky. Those are my socials. So there's a lot of ways to be able to engage with me and the Stephen Kingcast fans out there. So thank you everyone for your support throughout the years, whether it's just through a review, whether it's through taking the time to shoot me an email, whether it's following me, liking my posts, or subscribing to one of the 2 tiers of the Patreon feed. Just thank you everyone for keeping this podcast going. Now today what we're going to do, like I said, talk about Nightmares and Dreamscapes, the TV series anthology show. So this came out in 2006. So where I was at in terms of being a Stephen King fan in 2006, I had kind of been burned out at that point. I had felt disappointment upon the conclusion of the Dark Tower series. Now, if you have not listened to my review of the entirety of the Dark Tower, along with all of the bonus episodes related to the Dark Tower and bonus episodes related to any novel or short story that ties into the Dark Tower, you may remember that I have really come around and appreciated the boldness of those final 3 books. And he does not go for a feel-good ending, and that's not necessarily a spoiler, but it describes the feeling that I had, that most of us had while reading the Dark Tower, Book 7, The Dark Tower. But where I was at that time, I did not engage in fiction to be challenged. I engaged in fiction to be entertained, and I wanted the things that I wanted, and I wanted it the way that I wanted. So for me, not getting the conclusion of the Dark Tower the way that I wanted it, after having spent a good chunk of my life at that point, I can only imagine what it was like for people that had been reading the Dark Tower series in real time. God bless all of you. I was burned. I've come around completely, and the way that I engage with fiction is completely different now. The more challenging the content, the more I perk up and try to engage with it. But at the time where I was in my life, that's not how I felt. I did not know that there was a different way of having a relationship with challenging stories, and I wasn't really thinking of intent and execution that much. So at that point, I had just kind of fizzled on Stephen King. So I did not watch Nightmares and Dreamscapes when it first aired on TNT. I didn't actually wind up watching Nightmares and Dreamscapes, any of it, until about 10 years ago. Now, this is crazy. This past January, when I was going through my catalog on my Podbean server, and I was reorganizing everything to streamline the podcast to make everything easy, I got really hung up on something because there was the initial wave of episodes that I did. Like I said, it was in the chronological order of publication. And then when I got to the short stories in that chronological order of publication, I didn't review all of them. It was only until after I was done with catching up to Stephen King's latest chronological release did I wind up going back and start picking out the short stories that I never got to the first time around, kind of like what I'm doing now with the television stuff. But I distinctly remember sitting down on my couch during one summer night watching Nightmares and Dreamscapes. I thought that I watched all of it, but it turns out that I really only watched Battleground. I think that I had planned on doing an episode. I didn't wind up doing an episode. If I'm wrong, if I did do an episode, let me know because I could not find it. But I had my notes, so that was good. I had my notes on Battleground, but then I wound up, watching the other episodes too. But it was just very strange for me to watch Battleground, not to not watch Battleground this time around because I had before. So this is just very, very strange for me. But like I said, I did not watch Nightmares and Dreamscapes when it first came out. I did sit down to watch it. I do have thoughts on it. And so what I'm going to be doing, I am going to be giving my thoughts on each segment, episode by each segment by segment, giving my thoughts and then moving on. So that's going to be the way that this episode goes. So the different stories in this TNT series that came out in 2006. We have Battleground, we have Crouch End, we have Umni's Last Case, The End of the Whole Mess, The Road Virus Heads North, The Fifth Quarter, Autopsy, Room 4, and They've Got a Hell of a Band. So I will be giving my thoughts. I'll giving a summary, and then I will get into it from there. All right, so let's talk about Battleground. The segments might not be that great, but it doesn't mean that the project didn't attract great talent. We begin Battleground, a story that had been taken from... where was that? Was that Night Shift? I believe that was from Night Shift. It wasn't Nightmares and Dreamscapes. But we begin Battleground with William Hurt, rest in peace. He shows his burglary skills by donning a creepy William Shatner, Michael Myers-esque mask, tricks his way past a security guard to get into a building. Once he disables the cameras, he manages to sneak his way into the office of the CEO of the company, the toy maker. He quickly dispatches him, and our first part of the story is over. While on the plane, he's eyeballed by his seat neighbor while he enjoys a nice champagne, texts away, indicating that he has completed his job. In the airport, he sees the previous night's handiwork displayed on the news, and while he makes his way down an escalator, he begins to see signs of either unraveling or supernatural effects at work, in the case of a doll that he had seen the night before from the toy maker's place. He starts noticing toys everywhere, specifically this particular toy maker's brand. He arrives back to an enormous and stylish apartment and eventually falls asleep on the couch, only to be awoken by the sounds of a doorbell. There's a package for him, which he takes the time to open. Due to the nature of his profession, he can never be too careful. Once open, he discovers that it's full of toys, so he leaves it be, but when after he hears a crash in his apartment, he returns to find the box has fallen over onto the floor, and the army men who had inhabited the box have disappeared. As he begins to investigate, his normally ordered apartment begins to grow chaotic. Lights turn off, or so it seems. Instead, he sees that the lights have been cut. He's then stabbed in the foot. By what, you might ask? A soldier's bayonet. The action begins to ratchet as the insanity of the plot unveils itself. Little green army men launch an assault on the professional assassin. Like, machine gun fire and rocket launchers. It's batshit bonkers to watch machine gun fire explode from underneath a couch and missiles launch through the apartment. The simmering tension that has led to this moment completely boils over, and he, not missing a beat, first goes into defense mode before grabbing his pistol and returning fire while guzzling booze like a 1980s action star. He grabs a more effective gun and sprays his couch and floor full of bullets. And because this is an apartment, not a house, I just wonder if he's straight up murdering the people that live below him. Despite the early 2000s look of the movie, the effects of the little army men and their vehicles are pretty good, especially the footage of them dragging themselves from the battlefield of the apartment floor after he's sprayed the couch full of bullets. Or the incredibly fun shot through the army chopper window as they close in on a giant William Hurt. He gets locked in the bathroom, shades of Wendy Torrance, before the army men blast a hole in the door, forcing him to exit through the window along with the high-rise exterior, shades of The Ledge. He manages his way back in, and using fire to fight fire, he sends a rubber ducky through the interior pool as a diversion to allow enough time to blast the rocket launcher with a fire extinguisher, nullifying the ability to fire. It's a pretty clever moment, and the fact that it's going there, it's pretty admirable. This is an adaptation that's just going for it and embracing the concept of man versus toy to its fullest. He then pulls the old hairspray and lighter trick. It's flame on for William Hurt, and he burns them, stabs them, crushes them. When he finally thinks that they're dead, he takes the time to play with their corpses, so at least he's deriving some pleasure from the toys. In truth, he's cataloging the corpses in the vehicles using the item list from the toy box. After an unsuccessful relaxing dip in the pool, in which his wrist is slit up by an unseen threat, he finally taps out and tries to escape in the elevator, only to be attacked one-on-one by the John Rambo of Little Green Army Men. At this point, this army man has his own story. After all, William Hurt has just murdered his entire platoon. There is no longer a mission. This is personal. Right before our eyes, this story has morphed from supernatural horror story to personal revenge thriller. And it's intentionally hilarious how the army man actually looks like Rambo. He's got the face streaks, the red bandana, the bare arms. He's even got the Stallone hair. Unfortunately, in his rage, he doesn't think it through and falls for the age-old monster trap. He thinks his monster has died and gets in too close, only to find out that the monster is still alive and is crushed to death by the elevator doors. The army man's death, which is great, by the way, with him bravely trying to hold the door open before the elevator shatters his arms and crushes his head, triggers a dead man's switch, and trapped in the elevator with a thermonuclear bomb, William Hurt has met his end. All right, so just here's some thoughts. So for a silent film, okay, which is interesting, there's really no talking here. There's never a moment of silence. All right, there's the constant barrage of music over every scene completely ruins any of the impact that was supposed to come from the intention of crafting a mini silent movie. It was a great experiment, and it might have been successful, but unfortunately, it's fundamentally marred by the choice to fill every millisecond of screen time with music. Also, don't get me wrong, William Hurt is great because William Hurt is always great. But one of William Hurt's greatest strengths was the timbre in his voice. So to cast him in a silent role, it's a waste of his full potential. Crouch End. Now, I liked Crouch End, the short story. So I was interested to see how this played out on the small screen. Again, as I sat down, I felt the early 2000s of it all wouldn't fully do it justice, but for what it's worth, I was just willing to roll with it. What I don't understand is why this scene has 2 credits. There's the cheesy title credits of Nightmares and Dreamscapes, which looks like something like straight out of Erie, Indiana. And then it leads to the specific credits of Crouch End, complete with over-the-top imagery of bleeding statues and spiders. And then we get some establishing shots of Britain where Claire Forlani, who is a British actress playing an American character in Britain, is vacationing with her. And as soon as we get an explanation for why she doesn't like to push the elevator button twice, I almost threw my computer across the room. The exchange between Forlani, her husband, and the elderly couple in the elevator is dreadfully painful. Nearly as painful as how happy she is with the flowers in their room. They're beautiful after all, but not, as he tells her, as beautiful as her. Guys, this is brutal. Like, offensively terrible. We are given an extended sequence in which our groom tries to flag a cab. The dialogue is on the nose. It's painfully cute. Our main characters venture into a thin spot between dimensions where inhuman creatures dwell. But the most unbelievable creatures in this story are our main characters. They're not human. The only redeeming quality of this episode is that there is the oft-mentioned Stephen Kingism of thin spots between worlds. To hear it delivered by the taxi driver who delivered them to Crouch End, it's a highly effective moment for fans. The actor delivers it with such intensity and dread that the idea of the world growing thin is believable. And whatever goodwill the episode has built up is immediately squandered by Forlani, who was noticeably creeped out by his stories of death and druids. Decides to leave the safety of the cab because she sees a cat. Not just a cat, but a cat in the window of someone else's house. So what does she do in that moment? Well, exactly what you and I would do in that situation. You walk up to the person's house and tap on the owner's window. The cat turns around and it's horrifying. It's terrible 2000s CGI. By the way, the director takes the time to have Mr. Freeman, our groom, talk on the phone about pot roast. And again, even though she's creeped out by the creepiness of the town, and even though she has just seen a cat missing an eye with a fresh wound so bad its skull is showing, even though she was just verbally accosted by a dirty, malformed child with turn-of-the-century clothes, she tells her husband to go into the police station to ask for directions while she stays outside. Why? Why does he have to go in without her? Why does she have to stay outside? And despite this, they take the time to playfully banter with one another. Anyway, after some bickering, he's pulled into some bushes, and then thrown out of the bushes. They run through the streets of Crouch End faster than someone trying to get away from having to watch the adaptation of Crouch End. Okay, so skipping to the end, he's eaten by a Lovecraftian monster, but at least he's been put out of his misery, and I'm jealous. Okay, Omni's last case. Thoughts? We get a noirish little tale set firmly in the 1930s and meet William H. Macey's Clyde Umney, who has a dalliance in his office and is interrupted when a former client and lover interrupts and threatens to kill herself over losing his affections. He's called to action for his next case, and let's take a moment to discuss the choices made at the get-go here. Now, we just have to acknowledge that this is a hyper-stylized throwback to the films of the 1940s. And actors have adapted a transatlantic accent. The music is big, brassy, swoozy. It's a story firmly set in a different time period. And director Rob Bowman, you might remember that name from the X-Files, does everything in his power to firmly set this in our shared imagination of what this time period was like, as we learned together from Golden Hollywood and pulp adventure stories. From the dialogue to the music, the character beats between each other. It's a throwback to an earlier time. And it always makes me wonder where the truth lies when we look back into the past like this. How much of what we think of a time period was truthful to what we think it is? I can't speak to the 40s and the 50s, but I can speak to how the 80s and 90s are rendered in TV. So, Stranger Things just wrapped up this past year, and I loved Stranger Things, don't get me wrong, but so much of Stranger Things, plays out with like the greatest hits of the 1980s, where the big moments that we remember from the 1980s are as big as we would imagine that they were, but I don't know, I just, there's certain things like style and fashion and decor isn't always going to be up to date in reality. How many of us, for instance, growing up in the 80s, had furniture and decor from the 70s. And that's what we grew up with. Though we were growing up in the 80s, the furniture bought was from an earlier time, because you're not just going to buy the newest style because it's a new style. You're going to stay with what you have. And I just say that because that's not what television shows and movies are going to have you to think, it was. So this stylized world and the way of talking and the gender politics and whatever it is, I wonder how much of this, the music stylings, was truly of the time. I don't know. If anyone has more information on this, please write into stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. But this, at the same time, this is the magic of storytelling, isn't it? What we do. We get to come together and dream and shape our reality by just playing with the same toys. So with those same toys, it's the same architects, it's the same tropes, and in this case, it's Omni's last case, which is a hard-boiled PI. After a day of fighting bad guys, winning over the hearts of the various dames he saves, he goes to bed and wakes up to a world that's slowly becoming unrecognizable to him. The idea of mortality intrudes upon the story through the reveal that his trusty elevator operator has cancer, and when asked how long he thinks he could have lasted for, Omni reveals forever. Knowing that this is a character existing in a fictional universe, the concept of mortality is haunting. He's a character whose life is a never-ending series of adventures without true conflict. The bullets will always whiz by his head, he'll always save the day, he'll always crack his one-liners, and always woo the damsel in distress. Here he's faced by the blood-splattered gloved hand of his corpse-like elevator operator, and he finds that the shadow is starting to draw itself over his perpetual sunny life. The shadow spreads further. Learning that his trusted secretary has left him, and finding himself alone, he is introduced to his maker, Sam Landry, the owner of the building and author of his life. They have an interesting conversation about existence, about writing, and we get the thrust of this episode, that Landry has found a way to swap places with his creation, from an inability to live life in reality following the drowning death of his son. It's an interesting premise, the idea that we all seek escapism in the face of tragedy. What if you had the true ability to do just that? Here, King explores that possibility. The problem is that this idea is explored to its furthest extent, with Sam fulfilling the promise, and we get a fish out of water story with Omni waking up in Sam's world and meeting Sam's wife. Mrs. Landry enjoys the upgrade and the thrill of the fantasy that comes with being the sultry dame in a detective story. Meanwhile, Mrs. Landry's heaven is Mr. Landry's hell. Clyde gets to reap the benefits, at least momentarily, of what was left for him, while Sam struggles to find his footing as a private investigator and bumbles his way through his first case. Shortly after, realizing that she's been abandoned by her husband, who has been replaced by a womanizing, self-interested gumshoe, and never going to be able to come to terms with the grief that the couple has hidden themselves from, she escapes into a new world of her own by throwing herself from the top of a building into whatever world will take her. So my overall thoughts on this, it's goofy. It really is goofy, but committed. I do have to give it that. William H. Macey is he's great. He's a great performer, and he's good in this role. But I don't know if this is the right actor for the role. I think that we need more of like a John Hamm type character. I think that would be more effective. If I don't know. I just don't picture him as like a hard-boiled, PI saving the day. And like I said, it is very goofy with a deeply existential crux at the center of this. So I don't think that actually, is able to come together into anything meaningful. And then we have the end of the whole mess. We meet Ron Livingston, playing Howard Fornoy, speaking to us directly through a video he's leaving behind, and speaks of the end of the whole mess. Given the background, where he gives the background on his family, his father, a historian and rock and roll player, his mother, a successful CPA. Howard himself is a filmmaker, happy with his life and his childhood. And then he speaks about his brother Bobby, who grows up to become a genius scientist. Like the short story, it's an account, as the title implies, of the end of the whole mess. The whole mess being humanity. But before we get to the end, we have to learn about the whole mess itself, including the relationship of the brothers, their lives, and ultimately the tease that Bobby's genius, despite the grand ideas and inventions, has led to an experiment that has brought about world peace, but causes the erosion of purposeful thought, inadvertently causing the end of the world. The story is updated from its original timeline, and the role of 9/11 becomes a catalyst for Bobby seeking out humanity's cure against its more destructive nature. Bobby researches places of abnormal peace, finds a town in Texas, and is able to synthesize the chemical compound from the water into a drug that will be dispersed into the air by exploding a volcano. From there, we learn that 3 years of peace follow. But soon we learn the side effects to the drug is global Alzheimer's. I want to shout out Henry Thomas here, who delivers this realization with emotionless detachment. It is so matter of fact, it's haunting, and it's a highlight to this adaptation. So, I just gotta say that, just some kind of catching up on some thoughts on this. Ron Livingston, I gotta give him credit, he does a good job at giving a driven performance of a family member and only person within this family who can chronicle the conclusion of the human race while telling the tale of his family. But unfortunately, there is a layer of cheese layered over this short story that rob it of achieving its greatness. The intimacy of this of a brother, of a son, telling the story of his family and the impact that his family has had on the world, it's a powerful concept. And when you take away the more fanciful trappings that his family, his brother specifically, the impact was so great it ended the world. I mean, if you take that away, someone telling the story of their family and the impact that the family has on the greater humanity, that's something that we all can do for ourselves, because on some level we all have an impact on the greater humanity, one relationship at a time, one influence within our circle and the expanding circles that we have within our jobs and our relationships and our friendships and our communities. Just so happens that this family, the circle was much, much larger and impacted everyone within that circle, which was the Earth. But that concept is something that we can all relate to, and unfortunately, there's just a cheesiness to it from the music, and it almost doesn't take itself as seriously as it could, and it doesn't fully commit to the found footage conceit. This is an adaptation that I think could be done again. I just wish that it would maybe take itself a little bit more seriously to maximize the power of the beating heart behind its like I said, cheesy chest. Then we have The Road Virus Heads North. This will be very quick. We get King's favorite trope of a horror writer as protagonist, this time portrayed by Tom Berenger. As he gets out of his car, the status of his role in pop culture is quickly established, as he's immediately surrounded by adoring fans in the press. He's a writer who is also presented as an A-list celebrity, and Berenger's character is bored and unappreciative of his adoring fans. Shortly after, in a routine checkup, he learns that he may have cancer. He then buys a haunted painting, though he doesn't know it's haunted, from a painter who has recently killed himself after burning every other work of art he owns. Berenger returns to Maine with the road virus in his rear seat. And as he makes his way home, the murders start to follow, all leading to the arrival of the subject of the painting, who has come for Richard. This is an inert, repetitive, tensionless tale that is, as the Rembrandts say, stuck in second gear. there's not much to this short story, and there's not much that you can do with it as a short film. There's just a sense of wheels spinning just to get to the end, and at that point, it's just a merciful relief that it's over. Okay, we have the fifth quarter, where we meet Jeremy Sisto, who at the time was known to all of us as Billy from 6 Feet Under. Here he's an inmate who's visited by his wife Karen, and she implores him to stay on the straight and narrow once he's released from prison. His first night home is interrupted by their friend Barney, who's bleeding from the gut and describes an armored car heist. He's been betrayed by the other members of the team. He's able to escape and relays the information to Willie. Barney quickly dies, but not before Willie learns that he and Karen had struck up a relationship in the 18 months that Willie was in the slammer. What follows here is a typical hard-boiled crime tale of revenge. Willie uses the information delivered to him from the dying Barney to seek out the members of a team who had murdered his friend to gain pieces of a map that will lead to the location of stolen money. He succeeds in gaining all of the pieces of the map. He's taken back to prison, but his long-suffering wife, Karen, is given a new chance at life when she's able to use the map to find the location of the money. So it's standard stuff. It's harmless. It's rice cakes. It's bland, but somehow filling, I guess. Sisto's always good. You know, I'm a Jeremy Sisto fan, so he's good to watch. But it's really, I'm not going to recommend you go seek out the fifth quarter. Then we have Autopsy Room 4. Richard Thomas, Bill Denbrough himself, everybody, returns to the Stephen King verse in the adaptation of the how the hell are they going to turn this into a full-length episode of TV classic, Autopsy in Room 4. Richard Thomas narrates as his limp body is carted through the morgue. He tries to make sense of his situation, questioning whether or not he's dead, and we get a flashback to the events leading up to his predicament. He's on the golf course trash-talking his competition and bragging about his mighty work on the stock exchange. As mighty as he may be, when fishing for a stray golf ball, he collapses after being bitten by a snake and is immediately pronounced dead by an aged, dismissive doctor demonstrating his disdain for the Yankees of the North. It should be noted that the story takes place in Florida, and our victim is a hotshot New Yorker who is not looked upon too favorably by the locals. In the morgue, the doctors laugh about the age of the doctor who pronounced him dead, while Howard watches on helplessly and screams to the audience as they prepare to cut into him that he can still feel. The autopsy is teased as the doctors give him an external examination while he suffers the indignities of their commentary, calling him old, calling him balding. A rectal thermometer is inserted. He's jostled around. He's demeaned. Meanwhile, when two dim-witted orderlies bring in his golf clubs, the offending snake bursts from his golf bag and starts striking while they're trapped in the elevator. Back in the morgue, the long-flirting doctors finally make good on their promise and throw themselves into their unrequited love over the not-quite corpse of Howie. Thankfully, back in the elevator, when the surviving orderly is told that his snake-bitten colleague is still alive by qualified, trained paramedics, he puts two and two together and rushes to the morgue to interrupt the autopsy on a live man before it can begin. And just to do what you will with it, there is a running erectile dysfunction subplot that factors into the story and culminates in the conclusion, and that's how they realize that he is alive. So it is what it is. It is a hard story to pull off live action, and they do it. You can't help but feel terrible for him as he is demeaned, as he is violated, as he is completely at their mercy. There's the injustice of all of this happening that should not have happened to him, the dismissive nature of the elderly doctor who is just outright, prejudiced against New Yorkers. So there's all of that built into it. It's fine. It's totally fine. Again, I don't have strong thoughts on it one way or another. And last but not least, we have, they've got a hell of a band. Kim Delaney and Steven Weber, he of Wings, and Stephen King's The Shining. They're making their way, which was 9 years prior. They're making their way on a trip, and they discuss the power of music. They make their way to a diner to relax, and then later, Kim Delaney has a nightmare of missing fingers and ghoulish teens and special effects of blood filling up a coffee pot. It's a truly terrible sequence. And when they find themselves on a strange crossroads, she implores him to go back, but he pushes on. After an argument of whether they're lost or not, they come across a downed tree limb blocking their path. The oldies music CD spits out with a boyoyoing sound, it really does, and melts on Kim's leg. They push on, and they find themselves driving into a town called Rock and Roll Heaven. They bicker about continuing on. She's having concerns. He wants to check it out. The strangeness continues as a 60s peace and love bus full of hippies drives by waving. Once in town, they comment on the townspeople, each dressed out of time, and make their way into a diner to get some drinks. It's a gorgeous diner, themed to the history of rock and roll, and they're approached by a nervous waitress. Steven Weber pegs the other waitress as Janis Joplin look-alike, and we get a terrible lip-syncing sequence that's supposed to be unsettling. More unsettling is the note that Kim Delaney finds from the nervous waitress, which reads, "Get out while you still can." When Rick Nelson enters from the kitchen, Steven Weber starts to realize that his wife is right and something is wrong. The diner is joined by Roy Orbison and Buddy Holly. The rock and roll ghouls start to get a little too close and a little leering. Buddy Holly starts to bleed from the corner of the eye, and Janis Joplin throws up screaming maggots. Kim Delaney runs to the car, and they attempt to flee, but they're stopped by Ronnie Van Zant and Duane Allman. They try to escape, but they're stopped by the bus full of hippies and Jimi Hendrix. They're then taken in by officers Otis Redding and Mayor Elvis Presley. They're brought back into the town, and the rock and roll ghouls start to gather on the town square to prepare for the big show that will last for an eternity. Now, for fans of the Stephen Kingcast, you'll know that I was a big fan of the short story, They've Got a Hell of a Band. It's something that has always stuck with me, this horrible concept of just being stuck in this place for eternity, just simply by driving through, and the seeming bucolic and heavenly quality to it, that you are now sharing space with the oldies legends who are going to perform for you. That on surface sounds great, but the distorted nature below the surface is haunting. And like most of the other adaptations in these TV episodes, it's just fine. It's fine. These are not Stephen King's best short stories that are adapted, and these are not Stephen King's best televised adaptations either. So, Nightmares and Dreamscapes, it's not the best adaptation by far. The word is serviceable. It's not anything I would go out of my way to recommend, and I'm not going out of my way to recommend it on this podcast. Some points I just kind of my eyes glazed over I was watching. Other times I was chuckling. But all in all, it just wasn't anything that really stands out. But that's all that I have for this week, everyone. Thank you for sticking with me as I examined Nightmares and Dreamscapes. One way or another, it's fun to go back into the past and pick up these things that I never had seen before. So, like I said, guys, if you haven't head on over to Patreon yet, give it a shot. See what is there for you and whether you like it. That's Stephen Kingcast. I'm sorry, Patreon/Stephen Kingcast. You can write to me at stephenkingcast@yahoo.com. You can follow me on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Blue Sky. You can head on over to stephenkingcast.com. To get just everything pertaining to this podcast and all of the other podcasts. There's a link right there to the Patreon. And next week, I've never seen Desperation before. The adaptation of Stephen King's awesome mid-90s novel with Kali Trajan, Tack, and the villainous Tack. In Desperation, Nevada. I'm very, very excited to check this out because this one is starring Ron Perlman, right? Is that who it's starring? That's great. It's great casting. So I'm excited to see what Tom Skerritt. Oh, who doesn't love Tom Skerritt? I can't wait to check this one out. I'm looking forward to it, everyone. And you can find it here. You can find it here next week. But if you have been a fan of the Other World, I'm sorry, the Constant Reader tier on Patreon, you already would have gotten this about a month or so ago. So for staying ahead of the curve, you can head on over to the Constant Reader feed on Patreon to get early access to upcoming episodes. But next week we will talk about Desperation. I'm excited for that, and may you have long days and pleasant nights, and I'll see you here next week where MOON spells Stephen Kingcast.